Good morning. I'm Boyce Lawton. I've been a member of the HBS Admissions Board for the last 15 years. I'm going to ask you a number of questions today, so I'd like you to provide thorough but somewhat succinct answers so that we can cover as much as possible. And I'd like to remind you before we begin, the main things that the Admissions Board is looking for are leadership potential, impact, growth and self-awareness, interpersonal skills, and quantitative ability. And just in case our time runs short, I want to make sure to remind you of the importance of completing the post-reflection interview within 24 hours that we're done with this conversation. So are you ready to go?
I'm
Okay.
ready. Great.
All right. So I've read all of your application materials, but I'd still like it if you could start by telling me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a small rural community in central North Carolina. Both of my parents are small business owners. My mom's a florist and my dad's an HVAC contractor. And it was my grandparents' farm. And I think growing up in that like community environment really gave me a strong value for relationships. And I think that value of relationships is really what took me to Wofford College. So I go to Wofford, a very small school where you can really easily build a tight-knit community. And I think that Wofford really expanded my kind of worldview, especially during a semester abroad. And I came back from that semester abroad really looking to continue living internationally. I was looking for leadership opportunities. And I think I was lastly really also looking for the chance to be a part of a team in my next career, which led me to the Marine Corps.
Awesome. Okay. I'm going to follow this with what I hope is a very easy, soft question to start with. How did you find your way to Christmas in New Delhi with a Sikh family?
Well, very fortunately, I kept keeping close touch with my friends from Wofford, and one of them is an Indian American who has a massive family footprint in New Delhi. So once I learned I was going, I talked to her about like, hey, I'll be around for Christmas. Turns out she was there too, and it really just led to like, hey, why don't you join my family for Christmas this year? And didn't want to pass up on the opportunity, so I decided to join them. So all comes down to the relationships I built at Wofford.
Awesome. And did anything that you experienced in that Sikh family Christmas change your perspective of what to expect in India?
Well, they were far more hospitable than even I was prepared for. As soon as I walked in, I was given more food and drinks and gifts than I ever could have imagined. And I also was not prepared for us to eat dinner at 11 p.m. So, coming from the Marine Corps, a very regimented environment, that was my first introduction to 11 p.m. dinners of Delhi, which are common. But it was really fun, and I think that was like the first signal. Like I knew Indians were hospitable people, but that like took it to a whole nother level, which was really fun.
That's awesome. Okay. You have a real gift for writing. And I imagine that's a reflection of your emotional intelligence and your self awareness. You wrote the lines familiar with the American working class. What does that mean to you, and why is that important in your future career path?
My mom has worked every Saturday of my entire life. My dad is no stranger to waking up at 3 a.m. to go, to a grocery store and fix a air conditioning unit. Um, and I also have seen my parents' employees. I hear every night at the dinner table, we don't talk about geopolitics or the future of the stock market. We talk about what mom's employee did, what's going on at home for one of dad's employees. And so I think like I just really have spent my life sort of immersed with people who work really hard and people who don't make a lot of money. And sometimes they're struggling to pay the rent on a weekly basis. So it really just comes down to the environment I was raised in and one that I still keep very close in touch with even now, all this time away from it.
So, how is that going to translate into global logistics?
Well, I think growing up with two parents who are very blue collar folks really gave me an appreciation for the fundamental services that make systems work. My dad is an air conditioning contractor. A lot of people just walk into massive data centers and maybe don't think about, the all the effort that goes into something like cooling. My mom's a florist. I think everyone loves the final bouquets that she delivers to a wedding, but they don't think about like how she had to get the flowers from Costa Rica and the vases from China. And so I think, growing up in with both my parents working for them, really gave me appreciation from some of those fundamentals. And I think that same value for the fundamentals is what draws me to logistics.
Awesome. Okay. You wrote about three goals for each of the individuals under your charge at Mount Fuji. You said you wanted them to seek personal growth, seek professional growth, and show up on time. So, Can you tell me a little bit more about each of those and then tell me what you expected in those goals and whether or not that result is what you achieved?
Well, personal growth really started out with the fact I noticed how many of my Marines were spending their weekends alone in their rooms. And so for me, like I try to set an example of we live in Japan. This is an amazing opportunity as a bunch of young people to explore a new place and learn something. And so I try to exemplify that behavior and share that enthusiasm with them. In terms of professional growth, it didn't always mean just being a better Marine. It also could mean like, hey, I don't really like this. How can we set you up for your next step after the military? And so whatever their goal was, like, let's try to make you prepared for it. And then finally showing up on time, like it is basic military discipline, but I think it's also just a fundamental example of a basic military habit that serves in the rest of our lives. And to be completely honest, not every Marine I think grew under my charge, but I am proud of the fact that I think most of them did. And I am proud of the fact that, maybe not in my first week, but after my first month, everyone was showing up to work on time, which sometimes in the Marine Corps, we take wins where we can get them. And I was proud of that one.
Awesome. Can you give me examples of personal growth for them?
For sure. I mentioned guys who play video games all weekend. Like for me, I can remember one specific corporal from Hawaii who went on his own to a ramen shop in Tokyo over on a Saturday, and he told me about it on Monday. And this was a guy that was like incredibly quiet and shy when we first met. And for him to like go into the city and eat a meal and then come back and tell me about it, it's so subtle, it's so small, but for me that signified like personal growth and like I was really proud of that for him.
Awesome. Okay, now I'm going to flip the tables on you. Can you give me one or two specific examples of how you expect to grow personally and academically by earning a Harvard MBA?
Well, personally, I think that one of the beautiful things about Harvard MBA is it brings together so many people with different professional backgrounds. And I'm already seeing the benefits from that from my time at Schwarzman College. So the chance to learn from an investment banker, but also someone who worked in healthcare, I think would provide enormous dividends for me because I know how much I learned from other people being on teams. And I think within your cluster at Harvard Business School, all of your learning comes from your peers. And then professionally, to date, I haven't really had formal business education. So I think one of the great things about Harvard Business School and the method of teaching is that the case method really will force me to engage material that I haven't like really dove into yet. And so it really will provide that academic kind of experience that I haven't had yet and just getting a business education I want. And the last thing I'll just add is I think the Harvard ecosystem of the business school's proximity to the law school and the Kennedy School is going to be so valuable for me given my long-term goals of returning to public service.
Awesome. Okay, one of my favorite sayings is trust but verify. Can you read that for me?
I cannot. I think the second word is kar, uh, batam kari hai, batam kari hai, and then the first one is Bharat kar, yeah. I believe it says I live in Delhi, or I mean I live in India. I used to work in India.
I
It's
think
the last name. The last one's Hey, so I think it's like to be. But you'll have to help me out here.
I thought it was, excuse me, where's the bathroom? But
Oh gosh. Well, good. I got some work to do. I have to refresh myself.
that is all right. Uh, I like listening to you try to sound it out. Okay. Um, how would you describe your quantitative abilities?
Well, this is one of the reasons that I want to go to business school is because up until joining the Marine Corps, I thought I wanted to be a journalist in college and did not really engage quantitative material. So one of the things I do have is every day as a logistics officer, I was analyzing data. As a Fulbright researcher, I forced myself to analyze data in my research for CSEP and my full project at JNU. And so I will be the first to admit my transcript is lacking. And I'll be the first to admit that my GRE score is not a 168 quant. But what I do have is a desire to really gain this quantitative skill set I need. And I think I've already started to do that as a logistics officer, as a Fulbright researcher, and now as a Schwarzman scholar by not avoiding conversations about economics like I did as an undergrad.
You've answered two of my next two questions. My first one was, you used a great deal of numbers to describe your success in the Marines. What types of analysis did you need to do for your job there? So maybe just dig in a little bit more on a great deal of numbers with the Marines.
Well, the first thing I can always remember from the Marine Corps is our maintenance was managed by this system produced by Oracle. And whenever you like pull a report of all your data, it's just a mass of numbers on a sheet of paper. And so the first thing that I had to do, I can remember this vividly, was sitting down with a 19-year-old Marine who was an expert on this and saying, teach me how to read this piece of paper. And then once he taught me what every number meant, how could I put that on a slide that my commanding officer could read in 2 seconds and know what was going on? And so consolidating and like learning to synthesize started with a little bit of humility of like, hey, I need someone who works for me to teach me this. But then I picked it up and immediately was able to translate that to people above me. And really just took a little bit of humility on my part of like admitting to someone I don't know I need to learn.
Awesome. Okay, and then a little bit more about what kind of number work you did in India with the CSEP.
Well, I was looking for any insights I could on the relationships between India and other members of the Quad, so Japan, the United States, and Australia. And I find Dr. Prabhakar, she's working on manufacturing and their investment in Japan and India. So we were looking at foreign direct investment. We were looking at the change in foreign direct investment over time, looking at the tariff data. And then also, I think the other one we're looking at is like the change in number of legislative measures that were happening over time. So just comparing from year to year, tariff numbers, direct investment, and the relationship between those two.
And that leads me beautifully to my next question. Since you left India, the tariff situation has dramatically changed. How do you see that impacting India's future with the US or other countries?
Well, one of the biggest things that I took away from my time in India is that China's supply chains are far more involved in the small parts and intermediate goods, the sort of components that build assembled products. And so what I learned when I was there is how tariffs on China affect Japanese manufacturers because Japanese manufacturers assembling in India require so much on Chinese parts. And so I am actually pretty pessimistic about the current trade situation. And I think that if the United States and China are not able to sort of come to an agreement that allows the free flow that the global economy needs, I think there's enormous, consequences for India and all the other countries that are trying to build up their manufacturing capacity in South and Southeast Asia.
Thank you. Okay. Um, HBS looks for a habit of leadership. And obviously, your application shows a great deal of leadership that you've had in the Marines that I think would far surpass what we list and what we ask most people to apply. But how might you draw up all those experiences and describe what you've learned through those leadership experiences? What are some key takeaways from that?
I think to date, my leadership experiences have really given me three key takeaways. The first is the value of listening. As a Marine Corps officer, I think some of the biggest gains I made were from taking a step back and asking people around me for their input and showing that I was actually like implementing their input into my thought process and my decision making. So that really communicates value to everyone around me. I think the second thing is the value of planning. Um, going from all these different phases of my life, I think knowing that we need to have long and short-term plans that complement each other think was extremely helpful in the Marine Corps in sense. And I credit the Marines for really giving me that ability to integrate short and long-term goals. And then I think the third thing that really has helped me so far is knowing that in a position of leadership, I have to take care of my family, my friends, and myself, or I'm not going to be very effective at work and leading the people around me, my teams. And that really took some hard lessons. I think there were some moments in the Marine Corps where that like needed to click. But learning those three things to date, I think have put me in a much better position to lead teams, after banking all those lessons learned.
Thank you. Okay. Can you tell me about a time where you worked very hard to reach a certain place or a certain position, and then you got there and you realized it wasn't what you thought it would be? Maybe it didn't bring you joy, maybe it didn't satisfy you intellectually, or it just drove you crazy.
Well, I think the Marine Corps is an excellent example. I walked into a Marine Corps recruiter's office, did 8 pull-ups, and they said, "Come back when you can do 20." And getting to doing 20 pull-ups is pretty tough for a guy who had never done many before. Sorry, my timer's going off. Um, and so that there was a bit of sacrifice that went into the Marine Corps process. And then when I get and finally become a Marine Corps officer and stand in front of Marines at Okinawa, Japan, my first job was being the facilities manager and leading no Marines. And so that was crushing because I'd sacrificed so much to have this. And then I had to spend 3 to 4 months managing facilities on base, which is important, but not very glamorous. And I think that because I worked so hard in the facilities, it opened new opportunities and really showed me that sometimes you have to prolong some gratification to reach the goal you want. And it was a hard lesson at the time, but it's one that I think is going to serve me well in the future when sometimes you just have to kind of suck it up and know that, maybe your timeline isn't what you wanted, but if you keep working, the goal you want can come.
Thank you. Okay, so that was a branching question for me. And if you answered one way, I was going to ask you one question next. And if you answered another way, I was going to go after a different one. So you're telling me you've endured through a task and it paid off. So, same question again, something that took you a long time to get there and then it didn't pay off the way you wanted. Can you give me another example where you had to make a course direction change?
Absolutely. I think when I got to India, I thought that I wanted to do a very intense research project diving into, uh, all kinds of different trade relationships and speaking with members of the private sector and former diplomats. And what I was surprised to learn is that companies in India and a lot of diplomats and people who work in government are not very willing to speak with a Fulbright scholar, and especially an American Fulbright scholar. So, what that forced me to do was kind of to look back, revise my research project accordingly, and I think I still got to a very good outcome. I'm very proud of the fact that I met with so many members of think tanks and former diplomats. But that was one case where I get to the India with a set plan, had to pivot, and I guess the best takeaway from that was that I didn't fall in love with my plan. I had to adjust, and unfortunate, but the willingness to adjust, I think, was what allowed me to actually have a research outcome that I was proud of.
Excellent. Okay, it's another trust but verify.
uh, well, the first word's niche. And if I'm completely honest with you, I've been focusing on getting into business school and meeting my classmates and not studying Mandarin. So I need you've inspired me to hit the books once we hang up on this call.
This should be my name is Chandler.
Well, that is Kang Chung Le at the end, which is my Chinese name. But I maybe I'll shift focus to some Mandarin instead of my classmates once this process is over.
Um, okay, you're totally fine. Um, you mentioned that one of your struggles in India was establishing research credibility and establishing a network from zero. To me, this is a great question on our goals of interpersonal skills, growth and self awareness, those types of things. So tell me, from a network of zero, how did you move forward there?
Well, I credit modern technology and LinkedIn for one. LinkedIn outreach opened a lot of doors for me, and that just took some dogged research of spending hours and hours trying to find the people that I wanted to talk to. I think the second thing is leveraging my resources. So I didn't show up with many resources, but I did have connections at my host university, and then I also had the Fulbright team in New Delhi. And so I didn't have much, but using my resources available to the fullest and then trying to create new relationships just through sheer research was really what it took.
Awesome. Okay, one of the questions I ask anybody I ever interview, and spun for HBS, tell me the admissions committee's biggest concern about your application, and then convince me why we might be wrong.
Well, I think if I were reading my own application, the first concern I would have is that I'm an English major with a 160 quant on the GRE and an A in physics, an A in statistics, but not the strongest quantitative record. And the reason way I'm going to mitigate that is I have an entire spring at Schwarzman College where I plan to practice casing with classmates of mine from consulting backgrounds. I plan to take a financial reporting class in the spring. That's a full month dedicated to financial analysis. And I also have resources through Schwarzman College that will allow me to just take some classes and kind of get up to speed in the way that I want. So I realize I'm not there, but I have a clear opportunity in the spring that I plan to take full advantage of to get there by the time I'm at Harvard Business School.
Okay. Um, Looking at all of your academic and your employment history, it's easy to see you're a very focused person. You're a very high achieving individual. I'm not going to insult you by asking you which other institution you've applied to, but I am curious about, and again, you don't have to tell me where. I'm assuming you have looked at a number of other high profile MBA institutions. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. I'm very curious how a Harvard MBA for you would be very different from a Stanford MBA.
Of course, the first thing that jumps to mind is that Harvard has a larger class size and a larger alumni network that branches out to everywhere around the world. And I've already spoke to several Harvard grads who talk about some the biggest strengths of the Harvard network are the further you get away from Boston. As someone who plans to work in supply chains, an inherently multinational space, this is incredibly valuable for me. And I don't get it at Stanford, for example. I also think that one of the key values of the HBS is the proximity to the law school and the Kennedy School, which constantly is bringing in, leaders from policy and government and these other areas that I know my career is going to intersect with my entire time, working in this space. And then lastly, I think another thing that draws me to Harvard Business School is the sentimental sheer fact that every single Harvard Business School student I have spoken to inspires me to, you know, become a better version of myself. And there's a perfect track record of all the grads and alums and students I've spoken to. If I can be around 90 other people in a section that give me that same feeling, I think that's the exact environment I want in my MBA.
Okay, now I'm going to make you really uncomfortable. I told you in the beginning, I've been doing this for 15 years for Harvard. Um, I want you to answer the question again, but pretend that instead of Harvard Business School behind me, it says Stanford. Tell me the difference between Stanford and Harvard MBAs.
Well, I think we're at a pivotal point with emerging technologies, and the sheer fact of the matter is that Harvard's in Boston, Stanford is 45 minutes away from San Francisco, and it is fair to say that I think there are more companies leading innovation in the logistics space in San Francisco than there are in Boston, and so there's some value there. I think that where Harvard mitigates that is the relationships and footprint that Harvard has in San Francisco. And so I don't feel like staying in Boston limits me from accessing those opportunities and networks. I also think that Stanford has a bit more freedom in the first year curriculum that maybe would allow me to tailor it a bit more to my career goals. But I also think that Harvard mitigates that by the sheer fact that I need some of those fundamentals. And I think that learning from my classmates in finance is something that will serve me, and who knows how, but it's something that I need to know before I go off into my next career.
Okay, so now keep this keep this being different behind me. It now says Northwestern Kellogg.
Mm.
Why do you want to go to Northwestern instead of Harvard?
Uh, just to be clear, this is theoretical, right? Like
Absolutely.
I would not say that's true. Um, well, I think that one of the things that makes Northwestern really appealing is that they have overwhelming strength recruiting for consulting. And given that is my short-term goal, I do think that Kellogg would really offer me an opportunity to have a massive network of friends, close friends who are also going to consulting at the same time. Where I think Kellogg might be a little bit more limited is after the 3 to 4 years I want to spend in consulting, as I go on to an operational role at a just logistics company. Um, I don't think that maybe they would have quite the same global footprint in that space that Harvard Business School would have.
Okay, so now wrap all that up, put Harvard back there. Why Harvard over Stanford and Kellogg?
I think it really ultimately boils down to the long-term benefits that I want proximity to policy. I want to return to national service. And in the near term, Harvard recruits incredibly well for consulting. It will allow me to force me through the case method to develop a lot of the skills that I want. And I also think that, the global footprint is something that I want to benefit from for the rest of my life. As a supply chain leader, I see myself maybe one day checking out a port in Indonesia, and I think that I'll be pretty confident in whenever I fly into Indonesia, I'll find another Harvard Business School grad that I can ask and meet with. That's going to be enormously valuable for me, and I just don't know if I'd get it at Kellogg or Stanford.
Awesome. Okay, you've mentioned twice in this interview national service, and you put that in your long term career goals as well in your application, return to public service. What does that mean to you? And don't be afraid to say that to me.
Well, I will admit that I think the current state of American politics is such that I don't know if I'd want to run for public office. We're seeing increasing public political violence, polarization that I think kind of leads to stagnation and actually getting things done through public office. But where I do think I would like to make a huge impact is as a role in some kind of trade representative capacity and working on American partnerships, specifically in the Asia Pacific. And then we're seeing this every single day in the headlines, with tariffs and the ways that governments are sort of leveraging economic weapons to sort of get like manage the relationships between them. So ideally, I will build some expertise in the private sector that I can then leverage in a government career, combined with all the expertise and experience I have in Asia Pacific, do some kind of trade representative role.
Okay. Okay. And in Asia Pacific, you think?
I think so because I think Asia Pacific has such a deep supply chain footprint, and I just don't know if you're going to meet many people who have lived in India, China, and Japan, and built relationships in all three of those countries.
Okay. We are down to 3.5 minutes. I've got one final question in the end, but in a minute, minute and a half, what is it you want me to take away about Chandler Compton when I leave this interview and leave your application?
I think the last thing that we haven't discussed that I want to add is the fact that every single community and team I have ever been a part of is one that I give back to for the rest of my life. I stay in close contact with my former professors and administrators at Wofford College. I speak to former Marines that works for me almost on a weekly, if not daily basis. I keep in close contact with everyone that I met in India. We exchange articles that we read on China through LinkedIn channels. And so I can promise you, if you invite me to the Harvard Business School community, it's not just a 2-year relationship. It's one that I hope to get back to over the rest of my life. And I really look forward to also, especially doing it for veterans, because I've already gotten so much help from the Harvard Business School veterans community. I had several calls and meetings with I think 3 or 4 veterans currently at HBS. And I am really, really looking forward to doing the same thing and paying that forward. So I hope if I had to add one more thing, I think I have a track record of giving back and I have no plan of changing anytime soon if I had the chance to join you all.
Thank you. Okay, last question, which again, I always ask. What do you want to know more from Harvard Business School from me?
Well, there's so much disruption happening in education, and I think that the implications of AI are such that some may argue, what's the value of going and learning the fundamentals like accounting if, AI is able to teach it to you in a course through ChatGPT prompt. But I think there's a lot of value from, learning from the people around you. And so I would be curious to hear if you have any anecdotes or specific examples of how being around other Harvard Business School students maybe teaches things that AI cannot.
Excellent question. And with that, our time's over. So I would thank you very much. You did a great job. Again, I'd like to make sure that you remember you'll be receiving a post interview response form in the next 24 hours. We would encourage you to fill that out, spur of the moment. Don't take time to make anything look beautiful or wordy. And I wish you all the best.
I have to pee. I'm gonna do that really quick.
It's probably one of the
Give
ways
me
you
one
should end
second.
your interview.
Yeah, give me one second.